Hi everybody, welcome back to the Betty Sew Along. This is day 3. We've already completed our bodice mains. They're all assembled and ready to go. And today we're going to work on lining our bodices, and we're going to work on adding sleeves if you're adding sleeves, or learning the barrel roll if you are doing the sleeveless or tank version. So let's get started. Okay, so before we start lining the bodice, the first thing we need to do is grab some interfacing, and we just cut it about 1 inch and then the length of the bodice. I did just a couple strips here. And I'll just trim it down to match the length of my bodice. And I'm going to do that on the other side too, because one side will have to sew on buttons and one side will have to sew the buttonholes. Okay, so then I'm just going to press those in place, and then I'll show you how to do it with some fabric instead of interfacing, in case you don't keep interfacing on hand. Okay, so I have my second bodice lining piece here, and we have it lying face down like the other one. And I have a couple scrap pieces of canvas here that I'm going to use in place of interfacing. So we're going to put that right exactly where we put the last, the interfacing on the last bodice lining. So right here along the edge. You're going to want to make sure that the print is face down so that it's not showing through the fabric on the main side. If it shows through, it'll show through on the lining. Okay, so I just line these up. And then all I do is I baste along the top here, down the side, and across the bottom. Okay, so I'm using a stitch length of 3 for a basting stitch, and about a 1/8 to 1/4 inch seam allowance to baste it on. There you have it. Okay, so now you're going to want to grab your main bodice and place it right side facing up. We are going to take our lining pieces that we just finished and put it face down on top. Lining up all the edges, but especially the neckline and down the back, just like that. Now we're going to pin and sew up one side of the back, around the neck, and down the other side of the back. Okay, so I've matched up my bottoms, my corners, and my shoulder seams and the center of my neckline. That's the bare minimum, just to make sure those places line up perfectly. We're going to turn our stitch length to a 2, and we're going to sew with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Okay, and once that's done, we're going to take pinking shears, or just cut off your seam allowance down to about 1/4 or 1/8 inch seam allowance. Making sure to cut nice and close on those corners. And around the neck, you'll want to make sure that you have either that you're using pinking shears or that you're cutting little V's all around the neckline so that it lays nicely when we turn it right side out. Okay, so now we're going to turn it right side out. So we're going to tuck that behind our main bodice. We're going to poke out our corners. There's my trusty pencil over there. Okay, so now we're going to go and press that, and then we will top stitch. Okay, so now I'm going to show you how to do the barrel roll for the sleeveless or tank version of Betty. So I have my bodice done here with the top stitched neck line and back bodice. And I've pinned my flutter out of the way. I've pinned it toward the neck rather than toward the arm sky, because for this next part you really don't want to get that caught in there. So next what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my main part of my bodice and I'm going to flip the lining under like this so that that shoulder seam is spread. Then I'm going to, making sure the ties are well out of the way, I'm going to start rolling from this side. I'm just going to roll, roll, roll all the way till I get to that center of the shoulder seam. And you'll be able to see that our arm skies are here and here, and that's exactly what we want to match up. So I'm going to take the shoulder seams and pin those together, making sure that those flutters are not getting caught. So I'm going to do lots of extra pinning here. Okay, and then we're just going to pin. We're going to line up those arm skies like this, so it makes kind of a burrito, and we're going to pin all the way from this end to this end. And we want to make sure there's lots of pins here because we want it nicely lined up. I keep tucking those flutters out of the way because I really don't want to get those caught in there. Okay, so it'll look like that, and I'm just going to sew along where I pinned. So we're going to turn our stitch length back to a 2, and we're going to use the seam allowance of 3/8 of an inch. Okay, so when you're done your burrito roll, it should look something like this. And we are once again going to take our pinking shears or cutting V's along all of our curves so that it will turn out nicely. And then all we have to do is pull out the rest of the bodice from inside of the burrito very gently. There we go. So then we have a nice arm sky ready to go. All we have to do is press that flat, and you can top stitch it as well if you desire. Okay, so we now have this arm sky sewn and pressed flat. and we are going to sew up the sides of our bodice. So the way I do that is I take the lining and I tuck it under so that this part lies flat open like this, and I do the same on this side, and that way you can see how we are going to match them up. So then we just take this back bodice piece and put it right sides together with the front bodice piece, and we match up those seams and we just sew right along that side. There we go. We'll press that open. We'll press our seam allowance open like this. And then we will fold it down over top of one another. And you will have a complete bodice side. So once you have done that to both sides, you will have a completed bodice that looks something like this. Now for this bodice, I'm going to show you how to do the sleeves. So we are going to grab our sleeve pieces. So there is two ways you can do this. One is the way the pattern suggests, which is to sew through both layers of the main and lining. But you will have raw edges on the insides of your side seams. No matter what you do, you'll have the raw edges around the arm sky that you'll have to finish with a zigzag or a serger. But if you want to have the side seam, this part enclosed, you will have to sew in the round. So I think I will go ahead and show you both ways. So first, if I'm sewing through both layers, I actually like to hem my sleeve first. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Okay, so I have folded up the edge of my sleeve 1/4 and then again 1/4. And we're just going to top stitch that at about a 1/8 inch seam allowance. Okay, so it'll look like this. Now we're going to find our center and mark it. I'm just going to mark mine with a pin. And we're going to put that face down onto our arm sky. So I'm going to flip my flutters out of the way for now, and I'm going to match that center point with my shoulder seams here. So we are pinning and sewing through both layers for this sleeve. If you want to sew in the round, then you can skip ahead to the next video, the next part of the video. Okay, so then I like to line up the other sides of the arm sky to make sure that we are all lined up. Notice I flipped my bow piece out of the way with my flutters as well. Okay, the other end of the arm sky, match that up. Okay, and then we'll just pin up to that center point, making sure we get all 3 layers. Okay, so here's my arm sky here, and I've pinned my sleeve to it. So we are just going to sew up and around to the other side. And we're going to do this with a stitch length of 2 and a seam allowance of 3/8 of an inch. Okay, so there you have it. The sleeve is sewn in. You're going to want to finish this edge somehow, whether it's with a zigzag or serger. If you are not going to do either of those options, definitely use pinking shears. They help to stop the fraying. So I'm going to go ahead and use my serger to finish this. Okay, so now when you lay your bodice out, it should look something like this. Again, I'm going to flip those bow pieces and flutters out of the way to finish the bodice. So all we're going to do for this sleeve is take the back bodice piece, fold it over, match it up to the front bodice piece, and we are going to pin the sleeve so that the edges are matched up and the armpit part of the arm skies are matched up and the bottom of the bodices are matched up. And we are just going to sew straight along there. So again, if you can see, this is my sleeve. I have my bodice folded over on top of my front bodice, and we're sewing up the side seams. I'm going to trim my threads a little bit back here. Okay, so then you will want to finish those edges as well with a zigzag, with a serger, whatever you've got, use it. I'm going to use my serger again. When I use my serger to finish the bodice sides, I like to leave a long tail at the sleeve end so that I can tie a nice knot here, so that it's less obvious on the outside of the dress. So I tie a little knot and then I trim my threads. Okay, so now when we turn that bodice right side out, you can see the sleeve here. It's all done. Here's our bow pieces. They should overlap slightly. And that's what that should look like. And so now I'm going to show you how to sew a sleeve in the round on the other side of the bodice. Okay, so now if you want to have your side seams enclosed here, this is the way you're going to want to do the sleeve. So the first thing we do with that is flipping our bow and flounce pieces out of the way. We are going to match up our main bodice sides together and sew those, and we're going to match up our lining sides together and sew those. So first I separate my main and lining. I take the bottom of the back bodice and the bottom of the front bodice, and I put them together, matching up the edges. And I'm just going to sew that small piece at the bodice side, right here. You need to make sure you're being really precise with your seam allowance, otherwise the sleeve will not fit. Okay, press the seams open. Okay, so now we have those bodice pieces together. Now we're going to take our lining bodice pieces. do the same thing, right sides together. We're going to sew that side seam. And we're going to open that seam. Then we can take our side seams and put them together. And I'm going to pin them at the armpit part of the arm sky here, just so that that seam is nicely matched up when you go to add the sleeve. Okay, so that's ready. Now we take our sleeve piece, we fold it right sides together, and we're just going to sew right here of our sleeve. And we'll press this seam open, and then we are going to hem this. So we're going to press it up 1/4 and then up another 1/4. Okay, so I have pressed my hem up a 1/4 of an inch and then another 1/4 of an inch on top of that, and now I'm just going to top stitch about 1/8 inch from the edge. Okay, so there we have our sleeve. Now we're going to take our arm sky and we're going to flip it so we're on the lining side of the bodice. We're going to match up those shoulder seams. I have my sleeve right side out, and I'm going to go under here and match up this center top piece of my sleeve with the shoulder seam, and I'm going to pin that in place. Then I'm going to take the armpit seam from the sleeve and match it up right side together to my armpit seam on the bodice. Pin those together. You're pinning through both the lining and the main. And then we're just going to pin all the way around the rest of the sleeve. Okay, so I have it fully pinned now. Now we're going to sew all the way around the arm sky with a 3/8 inch seam allowance and a stitch length of 2. Okay, so now you're going to want to finish those edges. I will go ahead and do that with my serger. And when you turn it out, you will have your bodice all finished. Okay, so we have successfully finished our main bodice, except for the bow pieces. So for these, all you're going to do is overlap them 1/2 inch. place. And then you're going to sew a nice zigzag stitch down the center. Okay, so I like to use a stitch width of 3 and a stitch length of 2 for our zigzag. And being careful not to catch the bodice in the bow piece. We are just going to sew that zigzag from the bottom of the bow straight to the top. Okay, it doesn't have to look perfect because it's going to be covered with the bow center, but that's what mine looks like. Then we're going to take one of our bow centers. Where are my bow centers? Okay, I have my seam at the back, so I know this is my right side. So we're going to, we are going to wrap this around the bow piece. Like this. And have the bow center right sides together. Then we're going to sew that at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. So this is my side bow piece, if you can see it there. And this is my bow center that we're going to be sewing at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. And we're wanting to make sure that our stitch length is at a 2. And remember to turn your stitch width back to 0 for a straight stitch. Okay, so now we're going to trim down our seam allowance. And flip our bow piece right side out. Okay, so I've trimmed my seam allowance down to 1/4. And I'm just going to turn that in on itself. Okay, so then we just have that seam that we just sewed that we can see, and we're going to turn that centerpiece so it is between the bow and the bodice. We're going to want to make sure that that bow center is covering our zigzag stitch that we used to sew the bow pieces together. And there you go, you have a side bow piece. And there you have it. Congratulations on finishing day 3 of the Betty Sew Along. We now have our bodices completed and we are ready to start working on our skirts. So tomorrow, for the last day of the Betty Sew Along, we are going to work on our pockets. We're going to work on our placket, and we're going to put the ruffle on our skirt. If you're doing a ruffle, we're going to have a circle skirt, and we are going to attach our skirts to our bodices, and we'll work on the pocket bows as well. So it's going to be a big day tomorrow, but I'm really excited, so I hope you join me.